the grass is always greener on the other side. But really, when you get to that grass, when you look at it, you realize there are pebbles, there are patches on the grass. It has been rained on, it's wet, it's a bit swampy regions and stones and rocks and what have you. And it's not as comfortable.
Welcome back to Proudly Made in Africa. Your host, Raj Mavrik. And today, we're honored to have an inspiring guest with us, Cathy Coughlan. She is the CEO of Down to Basics, known as Diaspora, a network supporting immigrant entrepreneurs. And originally, she's from Kenya and now based in Ireland. Cathy has dedicated herself to fostering innovation and empowering immigrant business owners to overcome barriers and achieve their dreams. Successful businesses are not easy, especially in Ireland, for immigrants coming from Africa. So today we'll be diving into her incredible journey from Kenya to Ireland, her experiences as an immigrant entrepreneur, and the transformative role of networks like Diaspora in creating opportunities and driving policy change. Cathy, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for joining us today on another episode of Proudly Made in Africa. And today we have Cathy Coughlan with us. I hope you're having a lovely day.
I am indeed. There was a bit of a storm last night, so we are recovering from that. Great stuff.
Yeah,
all is good. All is good. Yeah. Can't complain. And thank you so much for having me on the show.
So I did dabble a little bit online, and I could see you have quite a story. So I'm very curious, especially for our audience, because from what I pick up is a story of resilience and innovation. But can you start by sharing, your journey from Kenya to Ireland and what happened or what made you establish, Diaspora or Diaspora?
God, thank you. I'm truly humbled because my story, I think, resonates with so many African people because I'm from the continent of Africa. So I think we are very much alike in so many ways. So I'm truly humbled that you're looking at my story. There is innovation and resilience in it because we only try to do our part. So essentially, I grew up in Kenya, and I had a fantastic upbringing, really, because Kenya is at the equator, and it's in East Africa. So it's a British colony, and we speak English. But the history of Kenya is very, very strong because the story is told from colonial days up until now. The Kenya before colonial days was actually a very powerful region. It had a lot of chiefs who were very, very strong. It also borders Uganda, which had key kings and chieftains as well. So when it comes to trade between Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania, which is the Eastern African region, our histories are very strong when it comes to trade. Kenya is at the coast of, so the Indian Ocean is what is at the coast itself. So there was a massive trade with the Indians, the Persians, the Middle Easterns. And if you look at the coast of Kenya, there's still a lot of trade and various multi-ethnic backgrounds based on the interaction and the mixing of cultures. And that is where, if you look at that region, that is where the mixture of the Portuguese and the mixture of the Arabs and the mixture of the African Bantus from Kenya region created a merge of languages, which actually became Kiswahili. So if you look at the Kiswahili language, it has Bantu words, it has Arabic words, it has Portuguese words. So Swahili itself comes from that region, and then it trickled down. It trickled inward. So, for example, to Tanzania, it trickled to Uganda. It moved all the way up to Rwanda and Burundi. It moved to DRC Congo. So the eastern side speaks Swahili. So that whole region, it goes to show you that the entry points of Kenya, whether through trade, whether through language, whether through leadership, is pre-colonial. Our resistance as well comes through the Mau Mau struggle. So we had the people of the Mau Mau who fought through independence, who come from Kenya. The tactics of how they fought and defeated the British were actually fostered and used in some of the tactics used in the IRA, the Northern Ireland, tactics which were used by South Africa. So Mandela would have also come to Kenya to try and learn some of the tactics in winning the British. So it's that level of leadership in terms of different aspects of life. So when it comes to resilience, it's good to see that that has trickled down to our way of life up until Europe, up until Ireland. So I'm truly humbled. Wow. That's from the general context. From a personal level, basically, I come from the central part of Kenya, or rather that's where I grew up, and also an influence of the capital, because that's where I'd have gone to school, I would have interacted, that's where I'd have lived most of the life, even though I'd have gone to the central region. The central region is where the farming comes from. My parents were business people. And when I say business people, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, every African person is actually a business person. Because it doesn't matter whether you're working as a professional or you're a farmer, or there's always these side hustles which are happening. So effectively, people are always business people. So my business discipline is kind of taken from parents who are working. I lived in a working class area. People were very hardworking. There was a lot of hustling going on, different diverse cultures within the capital, and also business. So when I came to Ireland 21 years ago, it doesn't even feel that long, but it is. I came here and I studied to be an accountant. And I thought at the time, I'm great with numbers. I'm fantastic with these formulas and statistics, and I'm great at analyzing data. So this is a fantastic role for me. I thought, yeah, accountancy is great. So I took up accountancy and studied, got a fantastic job. And I worked in Shanworth in an insurance company. And I was actually, very few migrants were there at the time. So it was good to see that if you work hard, if you put in the work, if you put in the discipline, there are opportunities. You know, and that happened for me. I studied, I worked very, very hard. I used to work in the day, and then I used to study in the night. I used to study till 4 in the morning, sometimes have 3 hours, 4 hours of sleep, and then still head off to work. So it was quite difficult, but it's good when you see that paying off. And you go to the workplace and you see you're one of the few immigrants working in a good position, paid very well, and you're very young, and you're a woman, and you're a migrant, and you're African. It makes you feel proud. It makes you feel, you know, so it was fantastic. But then I think maybe after a few years, when I had a lot of disposable income, if I could say, I thought, well, maybe a business on the side would be fantastic. And I thought perhaps the best place to do a business was probably not Ireland, but in Kenya, because I knew the landscape. I knew the infrastructure. I had networks still. So I decided to take a second degree because the job that I was having at the time was working in the NGO sector as an accountant and as a funding officer. So I'd moved from the insurance, moved to Dublin, gone into the NGO sector as an accountant and funding officer. But every single time I was doing my projects, doing budgeting, doing funding proposals, all of that was very much numerical focused. But because I was dealing with people, projects, programs, I felt that perhaps maybe I lacked in that area. And I thought to go ahead and do the second degree. So I did another degree in development studies. That was about 13 years ago. And armed with that, I decided to go and do my dissertation in Kenya whilst I start a business as well. So off I went to Kenya. I was there for 6 months, actually almost 7 months I was there. And the idea or the concept I thought was very simple. I used to go to the coast of Kenya, which is very humid. So you can find about 32 to 35 degrees, sometimes warmer, depending. Very humid weather. But for some reason, our culture doesn't have the kind of desserts that are in the Western places. So for example, we don't have milkshakes or ice cream. You can find them in big star hotels or in very posh areas. But when you're walking on the streets, that's not things you find. You find coconut water, mangoes, pineapples, you know. Yeah. So we didn't really have that kind of very ice cream and the milkshake. That was really not a huge concept. And I thought at the time, because I had disposable income, I thought, whilst I'm doing my dissertation, which was a research on the challenges of micro entrepreneurship in Kenya, within Mombasa in Kenya. I thought, whilst I'm doing focus groups and meeting all these small micro entrepreneurs, I used to ask them, because they used to sweat a lot, they used to work long hours, they used to be very hot. I used to ask them, why don't you buy ice cream or milkshake? They're like, we can't afford to go in big star hotels, and we can't afford to do this, that, and the other. So I got a small stall on the high street. So it's like basically on the main street. And it was, for me, it was affordable. And I brought in equipment from China and Germany. And I was actually making ice cream with local material. So I was making ice cream with cashew nuts, with peanuts, with smoothies with mangoes, passion fruits, pineapples, pawpaws. Everything was very local. Avocados. And because it was fresh, it used to be bought at the market at 4 a.m. And everything, including ice cream, juices, milkshakes, were all ready for 7 a.m. Everybody who's going to work, going to college, everybody used to pass there. The prices were very low. So there was a lot of traffic on the street, and people used to actually come and buy them. And especially at lunch hour, people used to find that my juices were kind of, it was like a meal, because what I did was I started merging my smoothies. So let's say I used to put avocado and mango, I'd put nuts, cashew nuts in it, and then I'd top with a scoop of ice cream. So it was very wholesome. It was a meal and very wholesome. Kids absolutely loved it. I had small deals which were very affordable to kids, to families. And it was such a big boost because I got return on investment was very quick. And fast forward, because I did sell the business eventually. So I had to come back to Ireland and graduate. And of course, I couldn't run the business whilst I was here. And whilst you can get somebody to run it on the ground, your values, your way of doing business is very different from somebody on the ground. So eventually, it felt like the business was kind of going a little bit backwards when I left. So I decided to sell it, and that was it. But at least because that business was set up, I could see 2 years later competitors coming up with other equipment, doing kind of similar things, even bringing new other ideas. So now there was a bit of competition. On that same main street, there were 3 stalls that came up 3 years after my business came up. And I was happy to see that with that competition means prices are coming down, local people can afford them. And for me, it was fantastic. So anyway, fast forward, I came to Ireland. I no longer have a business. I'd learned quite a lot. First thing I learned was you cannot be able to set up a business as an African diaspora when you're right here. Because you cannot be able to manage a business when you're far away. You need to be there. And whilst there's a lot of people on the ground who can manage it, it's very difficult to translate your ideology from what you want to somebody else because they're not here. So your broader vision, they don't have your broader vision. They might have a vision at the local level. I have a global ideology because I'm traveled. So that is one of the challenges. It's an opportunity, yes, but it's also a challenge when it comes to African business people, because we are kind of restricted to where we can start our businesses or where we can run our businesses. Unless somebody wants to travel back and forth running their business, it's fantastic. I, on the other hand, as a woman with a young family, it's virtually impossible for me to travel back and forth running and managing business. So that's one of the challenges. So when I came to Ireland, I realized very quickly, this is a good idea. Africa is an emerging market. There are so many sectors which are growing, which are vibrant. A lot of youth who are well educated can be able to run these businesses for you. There is a lot of innovation. There is fantastic technology. But as African diaspora, we seem to have a disconnect between our people back home or our home countries and what we have here. So we perhaps need to sit down as African diaspora business people and see ways that we can be able to bridge this gap of we have the capital, most of the time they don't. They have the skill, the labor force, the know-how, the technology, the time, the great weather, the food, the morale, because they are very vibrant. They have all that. We might have the capital, yes, and the know-how and the vision, but we need to bridge this gap. We need to not see it as if I sell my idea, it's competition. We need to look for ways to partner with local people to be able to grow the businesses and the industries the way we know them, coming from participation from the African people, but also participation from, they need to have ownership in these businesses as well. Because if they do have ownership, they'll do much more than us dictating to them. Because then it will look like we've just turned into our colonial masters, dictating to people what they need to do. But if we partner, they have some sort of ownership, then we can be able to sit at the table as equals and discuss how we can do this. So the challenge perhaps is, as an African, we live two worlds. We have a life here with our families or friends or our jobs.
Yeah.
And then we are very much in touch with back home. We have our networks, we have our extended family. And money that goes back home in form of remittances is still, it shows greatly that we are still in touch with back home. So we have a life here, but we have two brains. We have to think of home, we have to think of here. And that is perhaps another challenge, that we cannot be able to think one way. We have to think two ways. We can't just forget about where we came from. And we can't also forget where we live. So we are trying to make our world, our small little world here, good and comfortable, but also we are trying to impact back home. So bridging again that gap, we are very strained. We have a lot of pressure. That's another challenge that we have, And luckily, we have people who are now being born, African diaspora that is being born in Europe, who perhaps can carry the mantle of doing this. My worry is, will they have the connections? Will they have the passion? Will they not be too detached to care, So then you worry about those kind of things. So anyway, just to go back, because I obviously perhaps went round in circles, but when I came back, I decided that there must be so many people like myself who have side hustles or who have things they've started in Ireland or abroad or back home. And they're having challenges like myself, because I had a lot of challenges. I couldn't manage a business there. I tried to actually set up another business here in Ireland. It was very difficult somehow. There is a lot of paperwork involved. There are things, terms I couldn't understand. Even as an accountant, I couldn't understand them. And I was wondering, those who don't have the concept or the understanding, how will they actually pull this off then? So I got to speaking to quite a number of business owners and entrepreneurs. And I realized very quickly, we have a lot of challenges. But they are all very similar. Some are similar, most of them are similar, but some of them are different. So some of the challenges, for example, that I picked up on was when you don't have a focal point to start with. So, for example, when I started my business, nobody had thought of that business idea in Mombasa. But when I started 2-3 years later, they mushroomed, which was fantastic to see, because there's competition, the prizes, there's now the competition in terms of quality, so that was good to see. When in Ireland, if you don't see a business that is African-led or African-owned in the mainstream, you kind of lose morale. You feel, how do I actually start competing with the likes of Board Beer or, the chocolate companies or you just look at the main street and think, God, even though I wanted to start a restaurant, how do I get to a state where I'm walking on the high street, the main street, and seeing all these fantastic restaurants? How do I actually compete with that? These people are paying rent of up to 50,000 euros a year. How can I even get to that? So when you don't see your face anywhere, when you don't see any representation, the morale is lost, which means there is really no competition when it comes to diverse products in the marketplace in Ireland. So that's a challenge, because the more we don't see ourselves in the mainstream market, the more we don't try enough, the more we don't push ourselves from our comfort zone. We just really do the small things in the back, which means we're really not creating massive impact. We just create impact with our family and friends, but really it's not felt at a larger scale. I'll just quote Pharrell Williams, who said, if you're not invited to the table, you create the table. You create that table and you sit at that table then, if nobody calls you to any table. And by sitting in that table, you dictate who comes then to join that table. And that's why, for example, Notoba was created. So that perhaps, even though it's a smaller impact, younger people can look at the idea, maybe grow it, and see that if we have businesses competing and seeing what somebody else is doing, seeing somebody else has been funded. How did you do your application? What kind of responses did you get? What is the eligibility criteria? And perhaps that can actually help us understand how to get capital. Who is actually providing this capital? For example, there is Enterprise Ireland, there is Local Enterprise Office. So who exactly do you speak to? And if you don't get these government grants, can you get a loan? Can you go to credit union? How do you put together your business plan? How do you put together your vision? For example, 1 year plan, 2 year plan, 3 years. How can you possibly do that if you actually don't have a business? It's very difficult to tell people, put a 3-year plan together, and they haven't even started a business yet. It cannot, and many people will not understand because it sounds like jargon. So coming down to the level of people and sitting down and describing this is perhaps how we need to do things, and maybe even identifying who are the investors, who are the people like myself 20 years ago, 15 years ago, who had disposable income that are African and that can invest in our businesses. Because maybe they understand our culture, they understand what exactly we're trying to bring. Because again, one of the challenges is a lot of African people, when they're going to describe their businesses to these government agencies, they might feel that they're describing their businesses very well. But if you do not identify buzzwords, which they want to hear, now your business it's completely scrapped out. So if you don't know the buzzwords, if you don't know what words you need to say in order to actually fit in that criteria or to be eligible to get the funding or the grant, then you're completely out. So we need to get people who are creating those tables, kind of like Pharrell, who, as an African, you don't need to have that jargon. We know instinctively what you're saying. And we also need to know which businesses are a bit of, they're all out there. We know because we are African, we have some sort of understanding on how things work. We are very similar in a lot of ways. So we need to create a platform for ourselves, kind of like Dotoba, but also we need to bring in not just business owners, because there is no need of, for example, if I could just use this same illustration, if you go to a hospital and you get all the patients together to talk about their illnesses, they'll just feel more sick and depressed. We need to be sitting down with business owners, talking about challenges, but also bringing in African investors or even Irish investors or any investor, so that when businesses have challenges, we can actually match them, or they can identify who can actually help them move them up to the next level. So if you're a startup, you're able to get somebody to help you with expansion. If you haven't started, get somebody who can actually mentor you to start the business and actually propel you to diversify your products and have them out there in the mainstream marketplace. So there are many challenges. We don't have money is a big challenge. We'll say,
Okay.
I don't have capital.
Yeah.
I can't start my business. But again, look, Mavrik, who in Africa ever got a grant to start a business? If I talk about my dad or my mom, they have absolutely no support from the government when it comes to starting a business. Yeah. So why are we looking constantly for support to start a business? Why can't we actually think about starting businesses the way traditionally it's been done back home?
Let me jump in here, because to be honest, you've actually checked off some of the questions I had in my head before coming on this episode. So I'm glad. But I want to circle back a little bit, because understanding where you're coming from, for me, seems like it really brings a new perspective. For instance, 21 years ago, which is actually really far, when you decided to come to Ireland, what was the pressing factor? Like, what were you not satisfied with? What did you see? And what led to that awareness that there's an opportunity in Ireland for you to take advantage of? I just want to understand, what was that factor for you? What happened?
21 years ago, that was a very young self of myself. So what was a challenge for me then is an opportunity today. So I'm delighted that you've said 21 years ago, because looking back, whatever I thought was a challenge was an opportunity, Yeah. And some of the things I used to think about were, that was the time when social media was actually coming out, trickling in to African countries at the time. So that's really when we could actually see how other people live, Look at the infrastructure. Wow. Look at the clothes. They look amazing. So when I look at a photo of myself, let's say 25 years ago or 20, and I think about maybe African Americans or African British or African people who lived in Europe at the time, and you look at their photographs, you're like, wow, this is nice. I don't know what they are doing, but I want some of whatever it is that they have, So then you start internalizing that and perhaps finding so much fault in your environment. The government is not good. There is corruption. All of a sudden, there is so much corruption. There are no jobs. You probably haven't even looked enough. I remember I had 2 jobs at the time, and I was awaiting to go to university, and I'd been given 2 jobs. So one was I'm actually an artist, a gifted artist. So I do fine arts with oil. On
Wow,
canvas.
all painting.
Actually
That's
done
beautiful.
exhibitions before. So I was a very gifted artist, and I used to be at a studio doing my art, selling painting. I used to be contracted to do windows and signs during Christmas time. I had a job. But if I think then that maybe perhaps getting, just for example, an equivalent of maybe €5 for a day's work, which, by the way, would have afforded me then a lot of things. Transport, food, I could even save it. It was a lot of money. And if it's per day, if you think about what I'm getting a month, wow. And sometimes the contract was a whole day, big supermarkets, you're paid very well, about maybe 3,000, 5,000, that was good. But now when you start comparing that amount with somebody who's earning in the UK, then you start converting those foreign exchange. You're like, oh, here, no, I'm wasting my skills. I'm wasting my skills. And everything becomes a problem. The education system is a problem. There is now political issues. There is, you're not getting jobs because clearly, even though you have a job, it's not paying as much as it would. When you start internalizing that, and perhaps even speaking to your friends who are thinking just like yourself, you even now start thinking more broadly in terms of what you hadn't seen. They are bringing other aspects. Now the idea becomes, I have to leave. This situation is very bad. I have to leave. So looking back, those problems that I had then, I probably have had them multiplied so many times in Europe that really it's probably my grown-up self, which is now maybe wiser. I'd love to hope I'm a bit wiser and a bit more mature than I was many years ago. But the grass is always greener on the other side. But really, when you get to that grass, when you look at it, you realize there are pebbles, there are patches on the grass. It has been rained on, it's wet, it's a bit swampy regions and stones and rocks and what have you. And it's not as comfortable. So what I would say is just make wherever you are home. Make it good, make it comfortable, do your very best, Now, Ireland has offered me opportunities that I would have never perhaps gotten at home in terms of education, in terms of working in places I'd have possibly never worked if I was in Kenya. Now, I don't know that. Maybe I would have been given the opportunity. But if I look at my peers, perhaps back home, or if I look at a majority of youth who would have grown up as myself, not everybody has made the same strides in life. So I can say Ireland has offered so much. The people are very good. I can't complain. Not a single country in the world doesn't have its negatives. Yes, it does. But I'm certainly not going to be here talking about how bad Ireland is, or I'm struggling, or it isn't. And just as much as Kenya, it's a fantastic place to be in. Yes, it has its negatives, but it's great. We just have to look for the positives and recommend ways that we can make our lives better, even though there are challenges. So just to answer to yourself, Mavrik, what brought me here to Ireland years ago was challenges that I thought back then were just too much that I could not be able to handle, and that I needed perhaps a country where there is security, the government is fantastic, there are jobs, education, and perhaps in a more vain manner, those photos, I also didn't mind looking like that as well.
Yeah, well, okay, so in that case, I know there's many countries, Germany, UK, US, Canada, they were very popular. Did you feel empowered? Like, were they helpful people around you that made you aware of Ireland? And was the application then much more easier? Did they ask you for excessive funds? You know how it is today in the landscape of coming abroad. For many people, they are also at that point. Like, obviously, it's like a 50-50 thing where there are people that don't care. They feel like home is where everything is at, even though it's not comfortable. But there are those who feel Oh wow, just like me when I was doing photography. I was a wedding photographer and I brought this entrepreneurial side to it. I bring a whole team, I hook up the decorator, the everything. And then we get paid. It felt like really great money, but then I started converting too and I'm like, wow, this is what someone earns in an hour and I earns, you know what I mean? So my question is, but it took me almost 2 years to actually get over. So I kept applying, looking for scholarships and stuff. So I'm just curious what it was like for you back then. Really, did was Ireland your first choice, and was it hard to really like come abroad to come and study?
Ireland was never my first choice. In fact, it was never in the radar at all.
Hmm.
It just never was. Britain, however, was. United Kingdom was because we are a colony of the UK. And so if you look at a lot of things that have been brought into Kenya in terms of the influence on the language, influence on the institutions when it comes to law or especially third level institutions, they're very much English focused. So perhaps I thought if I went and studied in England, it's kind of just a continuation of what my syllabus would have been or what it was in Kenya. It's a continuation. I wasn't leaning mostly towards America. I know a majority of people loved America those years and Canada. Canada used to be seen mostly around people going to work, professionals going to work. But I was not a professional. I was very young. I really needed to study first. So when it came to studying, I was thinking in terms of, okay, maybe America or UK, but I never thought really in terms of America because at that time, I used to, maybe I grew up in the 90s where it was hip hop culture, rhythm and blues. So for me, it looked like America was a fun place to be as opposed to studying. I used to be like, oh yeah, I'll visit there. It looks nice. It looks cool. The jeans, the fashion, the language, the raps, like everything was fantastic,
Okay.
But to me, I never thought, yeah, that is somewhere I want to study, but certainly I wanted to go and visit there. So UK was the only place in my mind when it came to study, something serious, something concrete. And then from there, if I want to maybe go somewhere else, maybe I could, but my mind was only in regards to studying and it was only UK. Where Ireland came up was there are many people from where I come from, and some of them relatives who would have gone to maybe UK. But there were also some who had come to Ireland, and those would have been friends because I actually don't even have family, extended family here in Ireland. But most of them would have been perhaps close friends who came during the Celtic Tiger years. So they would have perhaps maybe come from the UK, gotten jobs here. Some of them started getting scholarships coming this way. And some of them were getting scholarships to go to Germany or France or the Netherlands, but they were struggling with the languages. So first you had to have 1 or 2 years where you study the language and then you go to the field of study. Now, I wasn't really interested in studying any languages. I speak 3 languages. So I have never thought to be a linguist or to add more. My 3 were enough. So I was thinking, I just need to study in English or in what I know, and that's it. So if this is a new country which is bringing new prospects, it's kind of like the new frontier. I thought, yeah, maybe I might try. And if it's not too comfortable for me, perhaps if I finish studying, then I can move over to the United Kingdom because I thought at the time it was more diverse in terms of cultures, in terms of the way it handled new people or immigrants. That's what I thought anyway at the time. So that's how I started thinking about Ireland. So when I came, we were very new here. It was not as hard to come in, whether you're coming to study or to work. It was not as hard because it was during the Celtic Tiger years. I'm delighted I made the right decision because I absolutely love Ireland. I really do. I find the Irish very similar to Africans in the sense that you can walk to the bus stop to catch a bus. Somebody will talk to you, get on the bus, talk to the driver. You might just end up talking to somebody on the train. People talk about everything. You go to a pub, everybody's talking to everybody. So they're very friendly. So it felt like home far away from home. I have visited the United Kingdom very many times, and I still don't feel that it's very similar. Of course, it's very different, but that kind of people being communal, but when people talk to each other, that whole, the Irish have a sense of humor. They love joking all the time.
Yeah.
The British, I find, perhaps it's just on a personal view, I find them very chilled out and very relaxed and very laid back. And, they'd be a bit more wary before they can talk to you about all this, things. So for me, Ireland was just fantastic. I thought it was a great place. And I never thought after that, after studying, to move anywhere. So I did think about leaving, though, back in 2013, after I did my 6 months in Kenya, and I came back and I graduated from the degree that I'd mentioned about earlier. I thought I could now move to Kenya and carry on with this business, and then I can be working. The degree will allow me to go and work perhaps in the NGO sector and bring in the finance element, or even though that doesn't work out because of the accountancy, I can still work somewhere else. So I had options because I had 2 qualifications with me and I already had a business set up. So I thought I'm going to Kenya. And I'd already contacted a couple of companies, shipped my things and everything. And just down the road, that changed. That changed maybe, I'd say a few years later, because what happened was when I came back, I got a bit of a contract to work, to do another piece of research. So I did the research, and by the time I finished, I was maybe a bit too relaxed now. The idea of now moving has kind of changed. Now the business has been sold a few years later. Then by the time I planned, and then eventually when I did think, yes, now I need to go back and do this, I met my husband, and he kind of derailed me. And in a good way. So 2024, here we are, still in Ireland,
Beautiful. Well, we're glad that you're still here more than anything. To be honest, when you spoke about what Daytoba does, I really want to get into the nuances of that, because are you of the perspective that immigrants here, or let's say in diaspora, should really focus on establishing a business in their current space, or they should focus more? So where should they place priority on? Should it be more at home or where they are? Because there is that nuances in many other places, Nigerians, Ghanaians, and stuff. One thing I've seen happen a lot is people have this perception that, just like you said, if you are sending money to somebody to be running a business on your behalf, it's either 2 things happen. You become a dictator in a way, or they try to take advantage of those nuances that you don't have visibility upon. So I really want to know what your perspective is on that. And also, what does Daytoba really do efficiently in that aspect?
2 areas you've covered there is in terms of what Daytoba does and how businesses kind of, how we can build capacity in growing businesses, but also identifying what the strategy is around maybe their businesses and linking that maybe to the African context. Now, what Daytoba does essentially, it empowers immigrant entrepreneurs. So, for example, we hold networking events where people come and they'll network. Yes, they'll get to know each other. But like I said, if you go to a hospital and you bring all the patients together to talk about the same thing, they'll end up being depressed. So what we do in the networking events, or we try to do, is whilst we are inviting African business owners or entrepreneurs, we also bring in speakers who have made it in Ireland, because that is more inspirational. They can ask questions around funding. They can ask questions around sustainability. They can ask questions around expanding businesses, because some of the issues that we have is we are the jack of all trades. If you're business people, you're the accountant, you're the contractor, you're the salesperson, you're doing your own marketing, you're the staff, you're everything, and you run yourself down. So when you get somebody who's made it and they have staff, and they've actually delegated all these duties, and they are making money, they are making profits, they are making a margin, it's interesting to see how that focus changes to, give me your contact, I need to talk to you more about maybe what I could do. And when we started Daytoba, we thought there would be an area where people can be able to mentor people, businesses. But that never really worked, because let's not forget, these people who've made it and they are African entrepreneurs, they have the same challenges, perhaps not at a bigger scale as the startups or those who are expanding, but they also have a challenge in terms of they still have issues when they get funding to expand a little bit more. They might also have challenges in terms of maybe they get bigger contracts. Let's say they're packaging things, or they're trying to get new contracts. They still get issues around discrimination. Some of them do. So when they're trying to expand and get clients who are not African, who are from other communities, perhaps let's say Irish, some of them could be asked, well, yeah, how long have you been in business, and which clients have you dealt with? And if they give a list of, I've worked with this one who's African, I've worked with this one African, I've worked with, they kind of, they want to know who have you worked with who is Irish. That for them is kind of the experience that they want. They don't want you to say because perhaps they feel if you work with another Irish person, then perhaps your quality is good. So they can only expand to a certain level. So they are also trying to break their barriers. So when it comes to mentorship, it's difficult for them to do that. So to answer to your question, Diaspora has still not been able to crack how businesses in Ireland and entrepreneurs can be able to remove that focal point from mentorship, because you can actually get a mentor, let's say from Enterprise Ireland or local enterprise office. But if you don't understand each other in terms of culture, you don't understand each other in terms of your business ideology, your vision, because we come from a different area, a different space, then the mentorship will really not help. They might tell you, try and get this person for, because I remember even when I went for my set up your own business training, because I did here in Ireland. I remember we were told in class that when it comes to funding, the first people you look at is your family and friends in Ireland. Now, I didn't even have family. So first of all, that's zero for me. Secondly, the friends that I had were like myself, so nobody had money. So I don't know who exactly would be looking at when trying to start a business. So the aspect of how this can go to the other is very difficult. Now, on the second question, when you talked about having African businesses when you're here, that's where perhaps maybe I've learned one or two things. I'd love to do those things myself. Unfortunately, because I have a family, it's difficult. And as a woman, as an African entrepreneur or an African immigrant, but perhaps it can be done if it's planned properly. One of the things that could be done is, because Africa is an emerging market, every sector needs something. So when you look at education, you look at infrastructure, you look at health, you look at energy sector, whether it's solar system, the solar energy or the wind energy, everything is a new sector which is emerging, it's vibrant, it's growing. There is a way that we can do small things, even the impact would be felt in a larger community. But like you mentioned, going into Africa to set up a business and then taking a flight coming this way is difficult. So one, you could perhaps move back home if it's possible. Now, again, most of the people who've stayed in Europe for so long, like myself, it's very difficult to just pack up and leave. Now, the other thing comes about delegation of tasks. And this is where you actually partner with a business on the ground. Because you see, we also have to learn how things work here. All the Irish businesses which have managed to go to Africa, Irish businesses that have gone to Asia, these people have not packed their bags and gone to live in those countries. They are still right here, but their businesses are doing very well. So if you look at how they have expanded some businesses to Nigeria, to Kenya, to South Africa, and they're right here. When you go to network in Enterprise Island, you see people who are opening international businesses in our own countries, and we are right here, and we are the ones who know the landscape. We need to trust the fact that we can actually also partner with businesses on the ground. And the reason why partnering is very important is you identify a business that is where you are. They need to bring something to the table. You need to bring something to the table. Because when it is mutual, there is a better chance of this business going. Because even though they sit back and say, yeah, I'll let this guy, I'll let Mavrik give me all the capital, and then what I'll do is I'll bring the stuff. There's really that there is no ownership. But if you say we're starting a business, it's 20,000 euros, you bring 10,000 euros, I'll bring 10,000 euros. I'll bring 2 staff, myself and maybe somebody else. Make sure you have 2-3 staff. We will handle marketing strategy from this end. You also need to have a marketing strategy. So first of all, you build the relationship, come to some sort of agreement. And like you said, even at the beginning of this podcast, there is now technology, especially after COVID. So people can actually, it's very easy when you're looking at somebody and you see that they're actually giving you information which doesn't even make a lot of sense. So even by the time you want to partner with them, if you've held meetings for a consecutive 3 months, you know whether this person is somebody you actually want to partner with or not. You've done your homework, you've checked reference, you've done a lot of things. So when you're partnering with this person, they also have a stake in it. They've put their money in it. You have put your money in it. They've put their staff there. They've put the equipment. You have as well. They are paying perhaps rent for the office, or if it's a manufacturing plant, they're paying perhaps maybe the rent, or they've gotten an investor. Perhaps you are paying for something else, but you've agreed on a contract that you pay for this, I pay for this. When they have ownership, and it's not one person telling the other to do this and the other, and then making use of the institutions in place. So for example, there are private-public partnerships or public-private partnerships. If this company, for example, is listed in the private partnership, let's say in Kenya, there is a private partnership, the partnership business community has a list or a directory of businesses. Go through that because they've already registered, they've paid membership, they usually go there for networks. They don't want to mess up that network. They don't want to mess up their name. So that's the body you go with, the institution you go with, identify a business, and then you go in and work with it, because they're also getting mentorship and capacity, and perhaps even some of the advice they're getting is that if you perhaps maybe get to this level, you'll get a tender, or you'll get, so they really want also to grow. So once you partner and you grow your business with them, they grow. So they can see, they have the buy-in. So that's the way I feel business should be done at this stage, because we can't move here, and they are there and they have the capacity. So why not partner? But it has to be a mutual partnership. That is one element that I felt over the years could have possibly been done. I don't think I should have gone and started the ice cream business, for example. I should have looked for somebody who's keeping fruits, maybe blending fruits on the side, but they don't really have the capital to maybe expand. I should have partnered with them, because they already have the networks, they have already a client base, and all I'm doing is bringing a little bit of a boost. So they're bringing in their income, I'm bringing in my income, they have their knowledge, I have mine, and we're bringing this together. That business, I actually believe, would be alive till today. But I went on my own thinking, now I'm bringing in my ideas, kind of like the European mentality. Let me take it all in, do what needs to be done, and then look, it never worked.
That's a very, very valid point in terms of people who have this interest in business, entrepreneurship, even if they are here, and now that yearning is like, what should I do? Especially here, for instance, you're talking about some of the, like the Dublin business, is it commerce, right?
Yes, the Dublin Chamber of Commerce.
Chamber of Commerce. So I've noticed, like what you said, because when I registered my business too, I went through some of those training, finance grants, and yes, you're right. It's like a therapist that doesn't understand your background information. It's like, oh, this is what my dad expects of me, and it's like he doesn't really understand it. So people from Africa have this perception that we're always misunderstood. For when I think about business, African businesses or African business owners trying to set up here, you said it like it feels very challenging because maybe the bar to get in is so high. For instance, they have maybe an advantage because it's their land, they have space, they already have some of the network. You're coming in 4 or 5 years after your graduation. You have not really gathered capital as well. But I've spoken to many people, or some of my friends that have been saving money, they're just earning. They don't really know what to do with it. But they also don't have this yearning of, doing a business with someone and say, okay, I'll establish marketing strategy here while you're establishing that. They just want to give you the money, get update, and work like an angel investor. So my question is that in any way efficient? Is that good in any way? Do you see that being a successful venture? Like if we have more Africans or immigrants in diaspora that just want to give their money to a business that has been proven to be trusted, and they see their money grow. It's almost like just an investment in stocks, but these are small cap businesses that maybe they haven't really grown to a really large scale. So funding is still a very major issue for them. They can't really bring $10,000 and you bring $10,000. They can really bring in the community to establish, maybe it's a farm. So they have the workforce, they have the knowledge, but they really need your money.
Like I said, personally, I don't believe that would be the way to go. And the reason why I don't believe it's the way to go is because of two things. One is those businesses on the ground, they don't have a viewpoint like we have. Because when you travel, you actually open your mind and you see so many different ways in different angles. And that's why sometimes if you see Africans going home, they find businesses everywhere they look because their mind is different. But when you're at home, you actually don't see them because that's the environment that you live in. Throwing money at ideas or businesses doesn't help. And I'll tell you why. If you won $1 million today, Mavrik, and we had an appointment coming Saturday to do a podcast, I can almost bet you will not show up for that podcast. And the reason is because you will start thinking, I'll buy a house because I have $1 million. Wow, now I've never gotten this amount of money. So you'll start planning. First of all, I have $1 million. What do I want? I need to buy a house. And then I actually need another house, maybe to rent. Because if I rent and I have rental income, I'm sorted for life. Fine. So, and then after that, I need clothes, I need a new wardrobe, I need this, I need a brand new car. Actually, my car, the one I was worried about in the storm, it's giving me stress. That one now I'm selling. It's not even giving. In fact, I'll donate it. I'll donate. I don't even need to sell because if I sell it, it's probably going to be what? 10,000, 8,000. It's fine. I'll actually donate it to somebody who needs it. You'll start planning. Your head, let me tell you, you won't sleep because your mind is going round in circles. And then you'll be wondering, who has been good to me in the last 1 year? Who can I give this money to? I'll give this one 10,000. I'll give this one 100. This one never picked my call. No, this one I won't give money. I'll start. Let me tell you, your mind will start working in ways it's never worked. And come Friday, you will just cancel and say, Cathy, I'm sorry, because you'll be wondering, what am I doing this podcast for? Like, how much am I even earning for this podcast? Like, who is this woman that I'm talking to? How is she benefiting in my life? I have never, let me tell you, issues will come up. You will have things. And that is the same thing. When you throw at people money they've never seen in their life, you start now giving them cause for them to not actually do what they were doing in the first place. Some people have never seen 10,000 euros at once, like together. They've seen maybe 10,000 in their lifetime. But at one go, you give somebody 10,000 euros. And I'm talking about 10,000 euros in conversion in Kenya. That's about 1.3 million. 1.3 million in one sitting. Like you just wake up and your account has 1.3 million. Look, even I would, perhaps your mind starts thinking broadly of other things which are not even entailed to that. So our idea is throwing money at people. The reason why they are doing those jobs is to get income. And some of the things that they are doing, whether it's if it's a mechanic and they're trying to get spare parts, some of them they get them through credit. They don't have that money. They get them through credit. They go, they fix the car, they get money, then they go and pay for these parts. Now, if you're just throwing money at them and sitting back, guess what? This person will probably take the money, go and start doing other things, and then the business will just end. So we really have to be smart about things. The reason why aid has not helped in Africa is because people go throw money, they go to Africa and throw millions of dollars at governments to run projects. Now, governments, if they've not seen this kind of money, they'll start thinking, now, I'm in this term for only 5 years before election happens. How much of this money can I actually pocket? Now, governments which were actually elected because they are fantastic and, then they start thinking in other terms that they weren't even thinking before. So you start making people corrupt, even though really the intention was not corruption. Because when you throw at people money, people change. Money is power. And you can't just throw it at people and expect them to do things. It has to be some sort of collaboration so that they bring in their input, you bring in your input. You go through their finances and see, okay, how much income do you normally realistically bring in every month? Then they'll say, perhaps every month I make 300 euro realistically. Okay, so maybe you can discuss, how about a situation where you can make 1,000 euro every month? And perhaps I also make 1,000 euro every month. What kind of strategies do you think we can put in place? Let them tell you what strategies they need you to put in place. then they'll tell you, actually, let me tell you, this is what we need to put in place. It is. Then you tell them, okay, what would it need for us to get from A to B? We need 5,000 euros. Okay, can you get 2,000, 5,500 euro? They say, probably not. Maybe I might get 2,000. And maybe that 2,000 euro, you can match it. Okay, you get 2,000 and I'll bring marketing and I'll do this. And you get 2,000 and you bring your stuff. And then once you put in your money in the account, then I'll put mine in. And then whatever you've recommended, I'll bring it on board. Perhaps you can also bring in your own recommendation. That is the way you mutually work. Throwing money at people has not worked for years, and I don't believe it will ever work.
Is there ways that we can work around this? For instance, we've mentioned that, it's faster to gain that money while working here than for someone even with the right mindset in Africa. So my whole point is, it's gonna be much more difficult to find 10 people who have the money to match your investment in their business. So for instance, if I think about maybe an efficient way to circumvent that, rather than give somebody 10,000 euros at once, an angel investor system can be, we give you 2,000 each quarter, and then the financials have to back that up for the release of further investment into your business. I'm asking because I get a lot of messages about people asking for efficient businesses, but they obviously don't want to, they don't feel like they have the yearning or time to really invest in the business in terms of other aspects. They feel like it's too much. So just curious too.
Absolutely. Now, when you talk about angel investments or venture capitalists, for example, it's kind of the mechanism where you bring in money. It's kind of like a loan. They can return it afterwards, or there is some sort of buy-in and there is some interest back, like you mentioned, the loan. So there is a bit of interest after that needs to be paid. When it comes to this kind of strategies, the interest rates are usually so high that they put African people in great debt. So when eventually you trust them enough and you do send that 2,000, 3,000 euro, they will do a runner because they were put in debt. They've already been set up to fail from the word go. If somebody says, I will fund you, an angel funder, for example, they say they'll fund you, they will get interest afterwards, won't they?
That's if it's maybe an established business. But let's put ourselves in a situation where it's an African, funding another African business, and maybe it's equity rather than interest. Because that's a common strategy, I think.
Now, when it comes to money, and you said perfectly, some people might not have that 2,000 euros. Absolutely. They might not even have 500 euros. But what they have is a lot more than we're actually thinking about. You don't have to have money. You see, resources are not just money. In terms of like monetary terms, there is human capacity, and there is, let's say, if it's a manufacturing industry, there is equipment. If it's farming, people have land or animals. That is their input. That is their resource, So if you have a contract and you have even a lawyer who says that you're in a contract with them and you're farming, for example, they're farming produce, it means their title deed can be held whilst you're doing this business together. Because you've put in 3,000 euro, their collateral is their land, or their collateral is their animals, or so they can come with collateral. And if they've employed people, for example, it's very easy to up and say, well, I'll fire them very easily, no problem. But when it comes to a family business, for example, that is where you check who have they employed. Are they willing to just fire people? Is it a business that has set up, has been there for a few years? Perhaps people can look into partnering with cooperatives. Cooperatives have been there for years. They deal with different, so if it's farming, for example, they deal with different farmers. So if you boost a cooperative is not going anywhere. It's not going anywhere. It's in the community serving, for example, 100 farmers. So if you increase that capacity, the farmers' capacity is increased. You don't have to know these farmers. You don't have to individually deal with how many animals they have, how much land they own. You don't need perhaps to engage a lawyer in trying to get their title deed. So deal with institutions, like when I was talking about public-private partnerships. Deal with cooperatives, for example. Deal with institutions which are well-known, which can be able to bring in, that is their collateral. The fact that they've signed into membership, into some grouping, that is already for you a very good, for example, platform to start with. That is what I would say. When you're working with people, public-private partnership members are perhaps the to go to businesses, because if you lose that membership, chances of you actually getting enrolled to another one is usually it's very difficult. You just don't stop businesses, swindle people money and then expect to, so those are the institutions we need to work with, as opposed to just identifying any random business, because, well, that's a risk.
Yes, no, it's a very high risk. No, you make a very good point. And one thing I can take from this is just understanding that rather than trying to fight what people want, try to meet them halfway. So, for instance, even when you're trading, you can't keep going against the market and think you'll be successful. I just took an anecdote there because I think maybe we can use more trusted platforms. So, an idea came to me years ago, and I was working with one of my colleagues, which was people in diaspora want to buy lands in Nigeria, for instance, but they have huge trust issues. You buy a land today, you go tomorrow, someone has, built over it, or your family member actually swindled you. So different stories. So someone started saying maybe they would start building a platform that can be trusted. That platform will do the due diligence. Once that platform now gets the trust of the people abroad can confidently put their money, buy land, and get all their deeds and know it's trusted. Same thing can be applied to different places like these cooperatives. If they have a platform that they can register to, anyone who has registered to that business, that platform does the due diligence and now is the one taking the risk. So those people abroad can come to that platform and believe, oh, this business is within 100 million Kenyan shillings. I can invest in. This is my capital. This is the CEO. This is his profile. So now I'm meeting them because I know there are still people that don't have interest in beyond. I just want to put my money and see that I'm making some impact. I can put my inputs when I have an idea. I can speak to the CEO, just like maybe Shark Tank. They put money in the business and then they're like a key, shareholder, but they're giving their insights and CEOs value that. So yeah, I don't know if there are platforms like that, but I assume there should be some, especially with the technology coming up right now. Yeah. But if there isn't though, that's an idea, guys. So
Absolutely, absolutely. There probably might be one in the near future, but anyway, we'll see. But yes, absolutely, like you mentioned, trust is one of the biggest issues. So I think the go-to at the moment is something that's already there for many years, which is solid, and once you're dealing with them, they will be able to identify what businesses you can work with, or you could work with them directly, and they'll be able to guide you or even recommend you to somebody who you can work with. So there are many ways of looking at it. And of course, I think boosting, you see, Europe and America is really moving towards the fact that Africa is an emerging market. It's the fastest continent in terms of business at the moment. But China is there, America is there, Europe is there. Where are Africans?
They are right for the taking.
The millions of us who are out here, millions. Tell me one that at the top who is out there who has done anything. You see, so we need to identify strategies of doing this, because when we start again, it's very demoralizing when you look in the public sphere or in the mainstream market and you don't see yourself. And usually when you don't see yourself, you don't bother because you feel, God, this is not achievable. But unless as individuals, we just try and challenge ourselves a little bit more, it's doable. It's very doable,
Yeah, it's very difficult for the first person to prove a concept. Those are the people who really find it challenging because you're going in a forest that you don't know where the light is. So yeah, it's very it's very demoralizing, like you said. And I think we Africans now we have to put more in the business of inspiring our fellow brothers and sisters, because once you see someone, now you have a track record. You're like, okay, I can follow his path or her path. And you're right, like it happened with your ice cream business where you had inspired competition. And I'm pretty sure if I go to Mombasa tomorrow, I did go there a few months ago. It was beautiful. Yeah. But I'm sure like it will have actually even expanded more, obviously. So one reason why I suspect Africa is really, the center of attention now for this big market is because like every established society, they start to grow at a very slow pace because they've leveled. Margins are not as volatile. But in Africa, it's rapidly rising. The infusion of a new element like technology, we it just pushes the market so fast. So, for instance, while I was in Nigeria, I'd seen my dad, I'd seen my aunties, my uncles, and I knew the job they were doing. Is the traditional, maybe I become a lecturer, and the salary was really okay for a family. But the more you grow up, you realized they were living paycheck to paycheck. And then you come online and you're seeing opportunities. But the catalyst was technology allowed me that. So I spent 3 months building a website like AliExpress. Initially, my dad thought I was doing some things else, on the dark web, until I came and showed him. But he was so surprised that I could build something so big with the knowledge from education, and it rapidly, the market was asking for it because we had businesses, retailers that didn't have exposure. The only exposure was limited to whoever passed their streets. But now understanding that there was a platform that they can take pictures and upload it, and anybody can just order, call them, and now they've shipped it. Their sales quadrupled. So I think technology has changed what's happening in Africa. We have people earning $5 million per month. I say sorry, $5 million, $5,000 per month in Africa. But obviously, we have businesses who are also earning even large amounts in Africa because the population is there. So the market is ripe. So I don't doubt that Africa is going to keep rising rapidly. I'm just trying to see how, obviously, like the discussion we've had today has opened my eyes even more to what opportunities for those abroad can take advantage of, while being a bridge of showing people at home what global view looks like and how it can really change things happening in Africa. For instance, in Nigeria, we have the poultry business, but now we have this thing happening where you can have an automated poultry business rather than having 300 people on a large scale. They have very few people managing it, and everything is automated. But my question is, how do you see technology affecting Africans' livelihood generally? Because we have people who need to earn. The more technology come into place, it seems to be removing some people from the whole supply chain, so the production of some of these things. How do you see this affecting Africans for now and in the long run?
The question of technology is quite debatable, and especially it's evolved a lot, and the newer technology is even more debatable. AI, so then it gets to the issue of where will we be for an emerging market? Where will we be? But let me just take you back a little bit. If you look at financial technology, for example, and I'm looking at the likes of mobile technology when it comes to finance, it's a fairly new concept in Europe, where people can go online and transfer funds from one person to the other. So I can now transfer funds to you and you can receive money instantly. And then Revolut has taken it a little bit notch ahead, where we can even kind of pay bills together, and I can even send money to you like instantly, as opposed to the bank, which takes a little bit longer, even though they've obviously upped their game. But this whole concept of money banking, it's a new concept. So in the last few years, I'd say maybe 5 or so. If you look at Kenya started M-Pesa 15 years ago. So mobile banking has been there for over a decade. So when it comes to technology, we are pioneers of technology. And how Kenya managed to do the technology is truly remarkable, because they actually managed to remove the financial institutions. So in Europe, you must have a bank account to be able to get or to receive funds from somebody else. In Kenya, you don't have to have a bank account to receive money, because they understood that the banks are not for everybody. Not everybody can access a bank account. Most banks require you to have a job, a wage, an income before you can actually open an account. So if you're a farmer whose wage or whose money is not consistent, you don't have a pay slip to show, or you're a student who has a side hustle, or a young person who has a side hustle, you don't have money that's coming in consistently, then you're kind of removed from what the formal ways of finance are. So it was very disruptive. The M-Pesa was disruptive because it managed to actually go and trickle down to all the people even who are selling in the market, selling spinach and selling maize. And the funny thing is, this technology was there long before the smartphones. So those Androids, those mobile Nokia, old Nokias, people had the technology to send each other money instantly with no smartphones, with no internet.
Just phone number.
Exactly, with those old mobile phones, we had the technology with no bank card, no cash. You just had your mobile phone and you could pay bills, you could go to the pub and have your drinks, you could get, there's nothing you could. And if you run out of top up, I could easily just send you top up. Or if you wanted me to give you a bit of money, I could send you like, it was just fantastic. This was 15 years ago. So I'm saying this now with the excitement of, oh my God, this is great. This has been my experience over 15 years ago. This is old. Yeah. We are now in new technologies. So the new technology that I found when I went recently, for example, is a technology where in very poor regions, so in the areas where, for example, children maybe live in the slums or very, poor regions, I'd say, in the informal settlements. When those children go to school, there is this new program where children can have food in school. And this actually encourages them to ensure that they go to school. Because as long as you're eating, the biggest problem is if you haven't eaten at home, then you can't go to school. But as long as you have, you've been fed in school, then you want to stay there and get lunch. You get breakfast, you get lunch, you're there. So you learn because there is food available. So that program is fantastic. It was rolled out. But the new technology is these kids are wearing something equivalent to a watch. And they scan the watch, and the watch shows whether the child ate. Not only came to school, but whether the child actually ate food, because it's scanned at the point of them being given food. The food is on the plate. That's when it's actually scanned. So not only as a parent are you confident that your child has eaten, you're also confident that this child is in fact physically in school. So if you think about it, these people are in the very lowest in terms of informal settlements, with this level of technology. And you can come to Europe and wonder, God, is your child in school? Have they gone to some park elsewhere, or they are not even there? Yet we are again ahead in terms of technology. So we've been disrupting. Like when you look at technology, we are way advanced. So fast forward now to AI. I think we need to be very careful in terms of what we borrow from other people. And we should have learned that from colonialism. When the colonialists, the Europeans, came to Africa, they changed the systems. So whatever systems that we had in place were obviously not good enough. So they needed to be replaced. Don't forget that at the time we're actually known as savages. So we needed to be civilized. We needed to be modernized. So we needed to get rid of all the structures that we had, the institutions that we had, and then bring what the colonial masters had. So all the colonies, for example, if it's Kenya, we have the British system. If you go to Congo, they have the Belgian system. If you go to, for example, Mali, they have the French system. And all those systems are the ones which have been copied and pasted and brought on the ground. But the reason we've been having conflict, so if you look back from where we got our independence, most of the countries are 60s. Ghana was the first country that got its independence. So if you look at what Kwame Nkrumah achieved, it was phenomenal. But if you look back from where Ghana received their independence in South Africa, because obviously they had the issues of apartheid, and then look up until today, we are now having turmoil. Because you see, we are just, what we're doing is we're running around circles like, what are they called? They're not mice. Yes, that's what we're doing. We're just playing catch up. But we're playing catch up to systems that are still very new that we don't even understand. You see, democracy is borrowed. And when you borrow something, it doesn't work for you because it does not align with your culture. It does not align with your customs. And it's very difficult to work with something that does not relate to your normal way of living. So I'll give you a very good example. If you look at some of the African structures, they were almost very similar in the way that we traded and in the way that we had, for example, social systems. So we were very social communities. We were very, we were not communist, but we lived communally. So if you look at countries such as Kenya, Uganda, Benin, Mali, Chad, they are very similar in terms of how the social structures were. So I'll give you, for example, an example of how it worked. So if you went to a village had a chief, and a chief had, I'd call them, let's say, soldiers, within its courtyard to ensure, of course, his security and all that. And then around the chief, because the chief was always located centrally, around these regions is where people lived, as well in communal areas. So there were huts, and in these huts there were, siblings who married, and wives came, and children, and then their cousins around. So these small villages also had small clans around it. So people kind of lived communally. But what used to happen is, if I take an example of a community that had agriculture, so if somebody is growing maize in one household, and another household has beans, and another household has chicken peas, another household has spinach, another household has okra, the chief's soldiers would come at a certain time, so whether it's every week or every month or whatever agreed time, and they would collect every small thing from every household. So if you had in your harvest 10 kilos of maize, then I can give what I can give. So if I've already provided for my family, and this week or this month I can be able to give 1 kilo or half a kilo, then that is what I'll give. The next door neighbor will give beans, the other neighbor will give whatever. And all these soldiers used to take all this stuff to the chief. And the chief had a list of who had been widowed, because the men had probably gone fighting. There was also resources and all these small conflicts within clans and regions. So all the men who went away either died, the widows were looked after. If there were places where there were people who could not contribute to farming, perhaps because maybe they were disabled, the food was then put together and then dispersed to these regions where people didn't have enough. There were also some people where the harvest was not as good, so perhaps maize did well, cassava didn't, yam did well, and okra never did. So with food distribution, it meant everybody ate, everybody fed, everybody was comfortable. And what the chief gave in return for the fact that, because some of the food obviously stayed at the chief's compound, and also the warriors or the soldiers or the work people, so they also had enough for themselves and for the family. So that community felt not only have they eaten, not only have they been looked after, not only do they have somebody called like a medicine man, which meant that even that person is also given a share. It meant everybody who was sick is looked after. Everybody was wealthy in terms of social welfare, worked perfectly. And if you think about it, Africa is a continent that has never gone to other countries to invade. We had no reason to invade anyone. We had everything we needed right there. We had food, we had security, we had social structures, we had institutions that worked. And that is the reason why the British or the French or the Belgians, they weren't able to actually penetrate Africa, because we had fierce warriors. And the only reason they were able to was perhaps because of religion. And they came, some of them, in the truth of trade. So they saw that people are trading, they'll bring sugar and salt and what have you. Then they brought in religion. And then with religion comes in, you don't fight, you do this, you do the other. And that is how we calmed down. But we were fierce warriors. You look at the origins of like the Zulu and all. Now, you look at that construction, and then you bring a different system of democracy where it is very individualistic. It is for me and me only. So I go to school, I get an income, I move up the ladder alone. And if my family borrows me money, I complain about how much they are actually looking for money, because they're not bringing anything to the kitty. There's nothing here that they're offering me. So it's very materialistic. It's very individualistic. Now, our current systems, our norms and cultures are still very communal. You still feel the responsibility that you still have to send money to your cousins, to send money to your siblings, to send money to even friends that you left behind. You still want to, because that is the way our culture is. We are still social people. We still carry the Ubuntu kind of element in all of us. Now, When you merge that with an individualistic and a materialistic kind of viewpoint, it never works. And that is why we are confronted with issues around setting up a business where you set up a business, then you have a conversation with an uncle at home, and then the money which was going to the business now goes to your uncle. There's now a funeral next week, you're funding it. There is something else, a wedding, you're now funding that one. You and somebody else in the States is helping you. You're the ones who are funding it because it is expected of you. That, in fact, that is what is supposed to happen. We need to come up with structures which are community-oriented, very close to our norms, very close to our culture. One of those is, for example, the savings cooperatives, for example, in Kenya, where people come together in groups, they contribute funds. The funds can help, for example, to build houses, to buy land, to set up businesses. And then if you're getting those small loans, the interest rates are also very low. But when you return the money is then spread out. The interest is spread out. Which bank here actually gives you money because you bank with them? Not a single one of them. It's because the element of that saving society, for example, in Kenya, has brought in the way our norms are and our customs. As Africans, we need to look at business models that work for us, because if we don't take a step back and look at ways on how we do things, it's going to affect us. So then now going to your question of AI, the reason I was trying to explain all this to you is because, trust me, it does tie in somewhere. When you talk about AI and how we are not going to be employed and how perhaps it can have a huge negative effect on us with such many youth who need to be in their workforce. AI, the way the algorithm is set up, it kind of looks at the past, and then it kind of predicts the future, the way the algorithm is. And based on that, for example, that's why, for example, if you go to ChatGPT, it can be able to pull all the information which is already available, provided in the past, it's already on the internet, and then it pulls all that information and provides it to you. So then whatever that information, you can use it to, to do something in the future, or you can plan ahead, We have to be very careful in borrowing AI concepts which are not for us. If you look at, for example, the policing AI in America, the policing AI has collected data historically. The regions which are not safe are the regions with Black people. So it recommends that those regions are the ones which need to be more policed, which means more violence, which mean more deaths for the Black people, because AI sees them as a threat, and it sees them as, violent, it sees them as criminals. We need to come up with our own technology that gives a different picture of what Africans are. And that technology is what the youth need to be trained on. And then instead of saying we are going to be out of work, the people who will be manning those technologies, renewing it, reinventing it, that's the workforce which needs to be trained on this technology. But we first need to not borrow things. We need to do our own things, come up with AIs, not with information that's a story, a history, a story of somebody else. It's a story that we need to write it, put that in the algorithm, so that when you're trying to plan ahead, the strategy that is a bit more positive for the Africans, train the workforce on technology to ensure that all this labor or workforce is integrated in these technologies that are going to be built, because it's effectively going to help us when it comes to infrastructure. It will help in education, it will help in health, it will help in developing systems which are renewable. So for example, solar, wind energy, water, energy. So who are the people who are going to be writing these algorithms? Who are the who are these people who are going to be reviewing and coming up with the technologies, coming up with new medicine, coming up with all this? It's the youth. So they need to be trained. Yes, the concept is borrowed, but the content has to be developed by us. So yes, it might be negative in terms of thinking. It might throw people out of work, but we also need to be very adaptable. We need to be able to focus on engaging our youth and them learning how to build their own technology and to learn how technology can work for them. That's what I think anyway.
I like it. Because at the end of the day, you said we are very entrepreneurial right from the start. So we have always taken advantage of technologies that have been available, even more than those who maybe had created some of them. So I've seen that trend, and I'm very confident that regardless of if many people will be removed from the labor force due to the automation of AI in different industries, the general community would still feel a positive impact. That is one thing I feel would happen. So regardless of if it's in Mombasa or Lagos, the youth that would take advantage in creating something positive out of it will be able to give back to those societies and empower people. We have the story of a Silicon Valley happening in Africa, in two countries in Africa actually. So this is happening, and I do believe it will have that positive change. But still, I do appreciate the insights and how deep you went into it. Thinking about how maybe Africans are concerned about technology, or how the future is looking for us. I'm just saying, do you see like the way we are today, with borrowed administration in terms of politics? Let's think about, because what you said basically means that our organic development, when we're coming up with our community, was disrupted completely, and that's why we're suffering today. Do you think we can keep using these systems in the way we're using them to get to a point where we have grown into them and we now understand how to get the best out of them? Or do we need to find a way to adapt our own style of administration in this political system to be able to help us get back on top?
I think we are very adaptable, yes. However, we also need to not lie to ourselves that borrowing everything 100% is really going to help us. It hasn't helped us because the narrative that's out there is that Africans can't do much for themselves. Africans we really have nothing to show for ourselves. We have more aid in our continent than we have trade. The companies that come there are more NGO related to aid as opposed to trade. The image of Africa is one of disease and poverty, and basically it's a very bleak narrative. We kind of almost, need to be saved from ourselves. That is the narrative. So yes, we can say we will be very adaptable, but you can accommodate something for so long until you lose yourself. So we have to go back just a little bit and look at what was there before, and did it work? If it worked, what is there now that is good for our communities? What is working in terms of trade? Take the good bits from what we have and then bring in our own and merge everything together. Because even in borrowed situations, it's surely not so bad, because in Kenya, we are all alive, we are resilient, we are working, we are surviving. Nigeria, the same. Ghana, the same. Tanzania, the same. Uganda, the same. Malawi, the same. Zambia, the same. So surely there must be something good in this borrowed institutions or borrowed administration. So let's identify what is good, but we also need to go back and see what was working for us, perhaps bring it into our business model, and that will work, because it has worked in different aspects. So it's just a matter of tweaking it. And if we're so adaptable and we've lived abroad for so many years, surely it's not very difficult tweaking businesses and making them work for us. That's in fact an easier ask than asking somebody to move from here and go back home.
Yeah, or start a political system from fresh. Imagine saying we should scrap it. It's similar to a story of one's life. You wake up, they say every adult has a traumatic past. And what's the question? Do you say you're hopeless because you have all this traumatic effect that has created wounds in you, or you learn how to heal, but also what lessons can you learn? Because many people say their trauma made them, for instance, but when you ask someone with deep insight, they'll say, I wouldn't choose to have those traumatic experiences if I could go back, but I don't regret where I am today due to them. So it's similar. You have to look. I really appreciate that insight, because it's just, you can take that and apply it to many aspects of life. Take what we have that is good right now and look at what has been good before and merge it to make something more unique for ourselves. Because there are many countries, not like African countries today, so we do have a unique opportunity.
You see, we are very diverse. And sometimes I think we look at our diversity and think of each other as the other. So it's more of, look at them, they're like this and they do things differently. But that is an opportunity, working with other people, borrow from them. We need to look at, how did the Benin, how is it that they were so strong in trade?
Yeah.
How is it that countries like Somali and Ethiopia were so good in trade? Because there were, perhaps some of them were in the Ottoman Empire. So their trade, they're very, like, Somalis are, it's a very interesting case study. But if you look at the Somali diaspora, like if you look at the Somali who have moved to Kenya because of maybe war or anything, they are fantastic in trade. Like, really, they are commendable. You look at them and you almost envy them. You're like, I can't believe how far you guys have come. It's just,
Wow.
And it's the same if you look at Europe and you look at the Somali business community. It's remarkable, and they really work together. They work together, they pull their funds together, and they pull it off. They really do. They just don't go. They're very consistent, and they do what they have to do. So we just have to borrow from each other. We stop looking at, they look like this, that's the way they do things. Just borrow each other in terms of, what are their strengths? What can I borrow from them that I can bring in here, that can work for us? That's what I think anyway.
Beautiful. We have a tradition though, where you just tell us what you imagine for a brighter Africa in the next future. So let's say 10 years.
Oh, 10 years is a very short time. I'm here over 2 years, 20 years, sorry, over 2 decades. So 10 years, blink, and it's 20, 30 years, But there's so much more that I'd love for Africa. I really do. What I know is, I think we need to learn from each other, because I think we forget how big and vast Africa is. Like, if you put so many countries and continents in Africa, they can perfectly fit, and there's still so much space. So we are so many of us, we are so diverse, and we are so unique in every aspect. But we don't learn from each other. We really don't. And I'll just take up one example. Even here in the African diaspora, if you had to tell me 5 things about different African people that you know about, I don't know if many of us have that kind of knowledge. We don't take the time to actually know each other. We just assume we know. So if somebody says, I'm from Ghana, I'm like, yeah, that's good. Yeah. Nkuruma, yeah. Oh, good. That's it. That's the end of a conversation, If we learn more about each other, genuinely, we open our minds and we learn. We agree to learn. We will learn a different way of doing things and approaching things. And if we can learn that in the diaspora, there is hope that we can actually do that on the ground. African Union, I have a lot of hope for African Union. There are a lot of things that could help when it comes to borders, when it comes to, it's very difficult for me to travel, for example, from Kenya to Cameroon. The level of scrutiny, the border controls, the questions, and chances I might not even be let in.
Yes.
But somebody from Australia can fly to Kenya, somebody from Australia can fly to to Cameroon, and chances are they might not even need a visa. But I need a visa to go to Cameroon.
Why do you think that is, though?
Because you see, through colonialism, when borders were created and ports were created, whether it's airport or, whatever ports were created, they were created to divide. Of course, the borders were there to divide. You divide a region and that belongs, these are the people there and these are the people here. And then there is a competition between whether it's the French or the Germans. Yeah, we are getting these are the resources. And so they already had their own competition in terms of where they were getting. So If England was getting so much from Tanzania, then they wanted to get more from Kenya, they wanted more from Zambia, they wanted more from Nigeria. And then the French could see, oh God, the English are doing so well, let's go and invade another one and add to our portfolio and invade. So that whole notion of borders is still there. Now, borders clearly divide. That's the job of a border. A border's job is to divide. So the fact that we are divided, we've been left with that legacy. And there is something called the pedagogy of the oppressed, where it states the oppressed becomes the oppressor, you know? And if you look at colonial masters, for example, in slavery, those African Americans who then became free and they moved to other regions, they oppressed other African Americans because they felt that, okay, what the master did, now I've taken that place, so it feels nice if I oppress other people. It's instilled in you in terms of some sort of inferiority complex. So when we inherited the legacy of division, we said, saying now those Cameroonians, those Nigerians, those Somalis, those other people will obviously not come to us because they are the others, you know? And because of that, then we created a system where we can definitely divide ourselves. And when Europe had the systems, or America had the systems where they have visa control, again, we have borrowed everything. We borrow everything. So when we borrow, it means the more stringent and more strict we are if we see somebody else who's African, it's because we have been oppressed, and we feel to gain power is to oppress the other. That is how we feel we are more powerful. If I can oppress him and ask him to go back home, then I'm more powerful than they are. So that is the legacy that we've been left for. We have been oppressed, therefore we have become oppressive to each other. But if we learn how to stop oppressing, to open borders, to remove those tariffs of trade, then we will go a long way into holding conversations, trading together, adapting languages that can work for us. For example, Western Africa, by now, to be honest, even Pidgin English should be a language that when I'm coming to West Africa, a majority of people can speak it. It should not be an informal language. It should be a language in the mainstream, where that's a language people need to learn. If you want to go to Western African countries, they speak Pidgin English, you need to learn it, or you need to learn some certain terms. If you come to Eastern Africa and Central African region, you need to know maybe some Swahili terms. That gives you pride, it gives you identity. But unless we can learn to do that ourselves, it's going to be very difficult to move then to another. We'll always see other people's things better, and we'll always borrow them. Yet the answer is within ourselves.
Speaking about these border controls and oppression, I've heard or I've read that Ethiopia seems to be one of the countries with the highest amount of visa refusals to other Africans. You know, do you have any idea why that is, though? Does Ethiopia seem to be different in perception to other Africans?
Ethiopia was actually never colonized.
Yes, I heard that.
In a sense, Ethiopia is pure, if I could use that word, in the sense that it's not corrupt with all of this madness of we borrow this, we bring the other, they were never colonized.
But they still have the same corrupt situation. So I mean, like, in terms of their democracy, it's still not good, or their society, or is it different though? I don't really know too much about Ethiopia. No, not the culture. Yeah, the culture is rich. But in terms of the...
They live their culture. So if you look at their dressing, if you look at the food, if you look at it's very, they still promote the culture. They promote the language, they promote and other African people really have been, if I can use some terms, we've been polluted. So when we come to those countries, we think they're backward. We think they are not civilized enough. And the government shields that. There has been instances where South African countries or people have gone to work there where they feel, those people are very backward in every sense, but they are not. They are very powerful people. They come from a very strong, they come out from a very strong heritage, and their customs are very, very strong. So it's not just Africans who actually don't get visas easily. Other people don't get visas easily either, and it's because they also don't want to be corrupt, if I could say that, But they are very good trade partners. So they're next to Kenya, so they're very good trade partners. But they also don't like to be oppressed. They don't like to be told, do this, do the other. Maybe if you can do this way. They are very proud of their culture. They are a very, very proud people. They're the ones who introduced coffee to the world.
Yes, the home of coffee.
The way they drink their coffee, because so much influence of their coffee is in Kenya. It's amazing. Like that level of coffee, that coffee is not even here. So when I go, especially to the coast region, that's where you'll see the influences of how coffee tastes different. The spices they put in the coffee, it tastes very different. So basically, it's not a corrupt country. It's an untouched country when it comes to the Western world. And they also want to live it that way. So perhaps maybe that pride makes them feel
push. Okay, that makes sense. But what I wanted to actually mention earlier was, even though yet not polluted, their political system still seems not efficient. I've had a lot of people complain about the corruption, or even Addis Ababa hasn't gone to the levels that the people wanted to go to. So now that's like a good case study for me to argue a system that wasn't corrupted by colonialism against others. So what do you think is the basis for those reasons? Why is it that as a political system that hasn't been corrupted still hasn't gotten to such a great height?
Ethiopia is one of the fewest countries in the world that many Western countries, it's not just Western countries, many foreign countries want to deal with when it comes to investment. Ethiopia, Vietnam, those are one of the top countries when it comes to countries that people want to work with. Those with investments, or those who want to, like the IMF and the World Bank, because Ethiopia have mastered the art of negotiation. They sit down on the table and they say, look, we are not budging on this. If you give us money, because you see all the money that comes, or whether, when it comes to investment or loans, especially from IMF, it comes with terms and conditions. Other African countries are just happy to allow any terms and conditions imposed on them without speaking. Ethiopians sit down and they say, we will take, for example, 10 million US dollars. And Americans will say, look, we can only give you $10 million only if you empower and promote issues around, for example, LGBTQ, or perhaps you can have programs on HIV, or you could have programs on child nutrition or child mortality. And they say, we don't have issues of LGBTQ. That's not an issue in our country. We don't have HIV issues. We have ways around working around that. And when it comes to child mortality, we have ways of that. We're looking for this money to expand our agriculture systems. And we are also looking for solar systems and wind renewable energy. So are you giving us the 10 million or you're not, so that we can look for somebody else? And they do not, they're not bullied into taking money so that they can start bringing programs of I don't know what. They're not. And when you do give them that 10 million, they use it on agriculture. They use it on infrastructure or energy or whatever it is they say they're working on. That's what they use it on. They negotiate and they say, we are not doing those programs you're asking us to do. They are certainly not a priority in our country. We do what we have to do. And the reason why it might look slow to you, or, they are very strategic. They work with the community and identify what needs to be done according to the community, not what the outside world needs them to look like. If you want the trains and the roads to be fantastic, that's your overview ideology. But their farmers are growing crops. They're able to trade with each other. They're opening regions when it comes to trade. Their own interclan trade is opening because they're able to boost productivity. They're able to have renewable, efficient, sustainable energies. If you look at their rural areas, so their capital might not be looking so fancy like Nairobi or Lagos or Abuja or Dar es Salaam. But if you go to their rural areas, if you look at other regions where they actually put their money when it's given to them by World Bank, it is where the direct needs of the people are food, health, education, and things like that. By the time they get to where you think they need to be, infrastructure and trains and all of this, you will be amazed, because it will now completely open up the whole country to another level.
Interesting.
They have worked their way way from the bottom. We are busy running around like hamsters.
I get you.
By the time they get to a level, we will be trying to get to there. We'll be thinking, and these are people who got money in terms of aid, but because there was a problem many years ago, yes, they are way ahead. And they're usually way ahead because they look into their culture, they look at their way of life, their heritage, and their customs. And when it comes to corruption, I'll be very honest. My personal opinion on corruption is very, what can I say, controversial.
Okay, let's go.
I have had Nigeria is one of the most corrupt countries in the world. I've had this, so like you've mentioned, Ethiopia is very corrupt when it comes to politics. Somebody has said Kenyans are very corrupt, when it comes to governance, but let us just quickly look at just even slightly corruption. Corruption is not a word that is coined in any African language. You tell me if your language there is a word called in corruption. Translate it.
I don't know.
Yeah, because there's none. It is a new concept. If you're told for so long that you're black, you will be black. We are black. Identify, show me, tell me who exactly is black in your eyes. Who is the color of your t-shirt right now?
We know that we're all shades of wheat.
Exactly. So in that sense, there is really no corruption. Our societies are fundamentally based on whatever the discourse is on corruption. And corruption essentially could mean, for example, you're corrupt if you're a civil servant and you're given, for example, a bribe to do something. It means you're corrupt, right? That is the essence of corruption.
Yes. Money laundering.
Yes, in my culture, if you go to somebody's house, you go with things. I cannot go, even here in Ireland, I cannot go to somebody's house unless first I go and buy things. I can't just go empty-handed. I have to go buy shopping, buy this, and then show up. And chances are when I'm leaving, if they've cooked, they'll give me things to bring home with me. If you go to somebody's house and you say, look, you've come with stuff. If you're holding a conversation with somebody and you've taken a lot of stuff and you talk about a lot of things, business, life, it's cold, there was a storm, I don't know my car, the driveway, children, God knows what, have you been at home? What happened at home? How did you come? All this. Chances are somebody might say, oh, I'm having a problem. My brother doesn't have a job. Look, let him call this person, Yeah, there's this person who helped me. Why don't you ask him to call this? Now, does it mean I'm corrupt? Or this person who's actually helping me is corrupt? Because I did take things to their house. So we have our culture allows us to take things to the chief. You can't go to the chief without taking bananas, for example. In the rural area, I'll go to the chief, I'll take bananas and I'll say, look, chief, the way my mother is having issues, please look after her while I'm away. It doesn't mean that's corruption. It just means that's what we do in a community. If you're empty-handed, you can come and say, sorry, I didn't come with anything, but really I have this problem, because that's just the way we are culturally. If somebody else comes from outside, it looks like I went with the bananas to the chief so that the chief can do something for me, yet he's being paid for his role. That is really not the essence. And if somebody comes from outside to tell me how bad, the structures are for me on the ground, essentially, they will say that I'm corrupt, my systems are corrupt. And it will be coined that, oh, if you go to Kenya, they're corrupt. If I see the police officer and I say, we don't need to go to court, let's sit down. And then they'll ask me, where are you from, Cathy? That's where you're from. I know your auntie. I know. Now, listen, the way you're driving, it's not good. Change this. Now, does it mean he's corrupt? No. It just means he's given me my warning, but based on the fact that he knows my aunt, he feels that he might advise me on better ways of driving and better ways of... Now, we've moved to another level where now governments can be given money from abroad. And when they squander it, like I explained to you, they don't see money for so long, and then you just give them loads of money, then they are called corrupt. So corrupt is a very much Western coined term. It does not belong to our culture. Our culture will never change when it comes to giving gifts to people, not because we want them to do favors. It's just because it kind of softens the tone to present your problem. It feels very difficult presenting a problem when you haven't brought something. You look like you're asking somebody to give you when you've not given back. So it gives you a level playing field. When you take bananas and you tell the chief to help you, yes, it's their job and they're paid for it. But we come from a different society. So no, yes, we are corrupt, and no, we are not corrupt. Yes, we are corrupt because that's what we've been made to feel. That's what we've been told over the years. But certainly, no, we are not corrupt. If you give the Irish government $1 billion without any indication of any, chances are they might do exactly the same as we do. Are they corrupt? Yes, they are corrupt. Do they take gifts? Perhaps they do. Yes, they are corrupt. That's their own terminology. We are not, because really that's the way we work. We go to people's houses, we go to people's offices with things. That's just the way we are.
So in that sense, can one argue that because before, let's say, the colonialism could take advantage of us, they had to learn about our culture, anthropologists and all. So understanding that was an aspect of, I give you something, and when I ask you for something, it's almost expected of you to reciprocate. Mm-hmm. Do you think maybe that was taken advantage of,
Absolutely.
in the sense of?
Absolutely. Not only taken advantage of, that ideology that we are corrupt people without understanding the elements of our culture, it's actually very racist. It is. If you don't take time to understand people's cultures, and then you start defining them with your own eyes, how you feel it's happening, yet it's actually not what's happening on the ground. It's very dangerous. So if you look, for example, at the Orient is the way the Middle Eastern people were looked at by the Western people, by the Caucasian, by the white people. The initial pictures that they gave were women who were dressed scantily, belly dancing. That is what the Orient looked like. It looked more or less like they have harems. But if you look today, those women are decent women. They are well covered up. They are religious women. They are women rooted to their family, women who, so maybe they did arrive and they did find a harem somewhere. Yes. But does that describe all the Middle Eastern people? No. So if you look at the Orient, it comes with connotations of racism, and it's been known, oh God, those people, the sheikhs, the this, that's the way they are. The whole, you go in there, you're given a bit of wine, there's a bit of belly dancing, women are there. Really, if you go to the Middle East, that's not what it's about. There's a lot more culture. There's a lot more trade going on. People sit down, they talk about business. Look at Dubai, look at Saudi Arabia, look at, those countries have really emerged. Because when you look at the perspective of what the Westerners thought of them, it's different. So when you start saying Africans are corrupt, you will sell the idea and it will have legs, it will run, we eventually will always be corrupt. But I will never stop going to people's houses or the chief's office with bananas and asking for favors, because that's just the way the culture is.
Interesting. So actually, you made very good points, because it's similar to someone who, let's say, an entrepreneur who starts to work on themselves. It almost feels lonely when they're working on themselves, because they don't know where the end of their journey will come. And maybe their friends are no longer with the same mindset. So sometimes they don't see where they're going, because it goes back to the whole Ethiopian experience. There are Ethiopians right now that sound very dissatisfied, about what's going on. And I think maybe they compare themselves with what's happening in Nairobi, what's happening in Nigeria, and they are not seeing the bigger picture that our government is putting in place for them. When you compare Dubai 50 years ago, I'm pretty sure the narrative that the Westerners were putting on them was, very downtrodden. And then today, Dubai changed their narrative. They didn't wait for that narrative to be changed for them. They changed their narrative. Now, the Westerners can't say this is who they are, and anyone will believe, because they see the place as a destination that they want to go visit themselves. So I really like you sharing that insight, to be honest. And anyone listening, if you're from Ethiopia or you're going there, at least you know that the government has a very good plan in place. So it comes down now to it. Should other African countries be looking at what's happening in Ethiopia and trying to, pick out some of those good from there to adopt in their own society as well. Because like you say, it's untainted.
I think we need to learn from each other. And not only necessarily Ethiopia, but even within our own countries, there are politicians, there are leaders who are trying to do some good. There are. And those are the people we need to look at. The communities that are doing good things. We need to identify those good things and perhaps tweak whatever it is we are doing to what they are doing, to bring that in, kind of adopt that. Because Ethiopia might work very well there because perhaps maybe agriculture might be the biggest, that is what suits them at the moment, or culture or their heritage is more important. It might not necessarily suit somebody who is in Lesotho or Swaziland. They don't perhaps have that land. It might be very dry. It might be, but how does that trickle down? How do other people use that land? What do they normally do for other things? So we need to borrow from good leaders, good citizens, and borrow that ideology. Look at other dry regions. What are they doing? What can we do in our country? Look at diaspora. You see, the huge influence of diaspora is remittances. We are remitting so much money in our countries, but what impact is it actually happening? Is the money trickling down to the community? Probably not. If you send money to your friend or family, it's just for them. So it's not necessarily for the community. We need to come up with incentives where we are building institutions that we can actually say, this is what we are doing. So for example, there is diaspora grouping in America. I'm not sure what country, I might be wrong, so I'd rather not mention it. But I know there is a group in America that has brought together African diaspora where they pool their funds, and the funds are used to set up industries in Africa. So if they're setting up industries, they already have partnered with the government and private institutions on the ground. So when they create manufacturing farms, people in those communities work. These people send less money at home because now they have their own sustainability in terms of income. We can also borrow from them. We in the diaspora, we need to rewrite our history. We need to change the narrative ourselves. We need to create tables, build tables and sit on those tables. If we're not invited to tables, we need to build tables and sit on them and bring some sort of positive change. When it comes to Africa, nobody's going to change that narrative because it suits them. It comes with power and dominance. So we are the ones who have to change that narrative. It doesn't matter whether you're on the ground or whether you're here. We have to essentially change that narrative. We need to look at each other not as competitive, like it's competition. We need to help each other. And it takes a lot to look at other people and think, no, I'm not going to tell them what my problems are because, I know if I tell them, they'll probably steal my idea or they'll do that and do that. And they might. But we need to look at each other, even as Africans, as friends. We need to look at each other as brothers and sisters. We need to work together, because the Ubuntu ideology is very much alive and well, but we really need to remove all these small squabbles and look at the bigger picture,
Yes, I do agree with you. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. To be honest, very, very inspiring. And, it has given me homework of what to go learn more about. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. And thank you so much for giving me the space to share and to talk about what I'm passionate about,
Absolutely, absolutely a pleasure. Thank you. And to everyone that tuned in, stay curious. I'll see you guys on the next episode.